has felt like the tenor of that, like general commentary we got from people has shifted, where it went from like, shouldn't you be using your talents for something more? Largely I've gotten in the last couple of years as people just being like, man, I wish I was doing something enjoyable that other people enjoyed.
Butterscotch Hey everybody, welcome to episode 509 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Matt and I'm the slip slinger.
I'm Sam and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's February 28th, 2020 vibes. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. And we'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your monthly donations to help keep this podcast going. So we are right in the thick of the Crashlands 2 beta. Mm-hmm. It has gone quite well. Mm-hmm. We see the playtime just creeping up and up. It's been pretty interesting to watch. So maybe we want to kind of talk a little bit about what we're seeing, how it's been.
Yeah. So last podcast episode, we were on starting day 4, right? So we're now at around day 11. And we had a handful of the kind of front runner people who were just pouring all their time into it, managed to beat it, which is good. Because the big thing what we talked about was like needing to get some eyeballs and people passing through the end of the game content to make sure that whatever weird paths people were taking, that would work. And it all seems to be firing great, just not on a technical level, but also it all seems to be hitting really, really well. So that's been really exciting. And then what we're seeing now is, people who are putting in more of like your relatively more standard, like, slightly busier person right now gaming time, which is like, a couple hours a day, whatever else, have still just been plonking away. And so one of the biggest things when we started Crashlands 2 was one of our own like the KPIs, right? Is this idea of median playtime.
Well, it's not our KPI. It's
true. It's Steam.
We'll talk about that.
Right? So it's not a mobile KPI by any stretch, but it is like one of Steam's primary ones that they surface to you. Is this idea of median playtime, not average, but median. And there's this interesting chart on the back of Steam if you're on your partner Steamworks account, where you can see essentially like player fall off not by like days, which is how you think about it in mobile, right? Daily retention, but by hours of playtime. So how many people made it past 10 minutes? How many people made it past 1 hour, 2 hours, 5 hours, whatever, right? And Steam doesn't provide you basically any comparative information with other games, except on that 1 hour mark. It has a little like sort of byline that tells you if you're average compared to other games on Steam, like the whole catalog, if you're above average, below, well above, well below, etc. So one of our major kind of planning points when we were putting the sequel together was like, okay, if we're looking at the chart for something like Crashlands, around that 1 hour mark, it's already down to about 70% of players are still around, right?
This is why we look at medians, because like most people who boot up any game will not make it past the first little bit of the game. Yeah. Right.
And there's that joke in
first couple hours or whatever.
Yeah. And there's that joke in games that like basically nobody finishes games, right? Which is true. Just sort of statistically, right? It doesn't mean you don't want as a dev there's just no value in finishing a game or making the ending awesome, right? But there's every so often you do see some of those like some of the NBA types be like, why do we even need to bother with polishing the end of this? Because 10 out of every 100 people are going to reach or whatever.
What they don't realize is like, what if we cut the game in half so it's half as long? Well, people will still only make it halfway through because that's just what happens.
It's just what happens. So what we're looking for then with Crashlands versus Crashlands 2 is trying to bump, especially those early, basically the first 2 hour numbers up considerably. And at least from what we've seen from the beta, and again, all the caveats, we've talked about all the caveats a bajillion times, but it is a small group, it is a time pressurized group, which is both like a pro and a con. There's all these things that make it pros and cons, so it's kind of, again, who knows what it means exactly, but we are seeing that median playtime is considerably higher already than the Crashlands is, which is great, like by a wide margin. And then that percentage of people who are getting across that 1 hour mark is also way higher, like 22% higher than it was for the original game, which is, again, very good. So all those numbers are the sort of thing where like, It's still not the market, right? So it's still not actually.
It's not paying players with an unlimited amount of time who opted into playing the game.
Yeah.
Who got it through Steam, who maybe didn't even know about Crashlands.
Exactly.
There's, like I said, it's asterisks all the way down.
But I think, and this is something we've been talking about internally, is, we every couple of days, one of us or some combo of us will look at some of the numbers and be like, what does it mean, right? And I think for me personally, a lot of it has been like, it's the sort of thing where my hopes get up quite a bit, where I'm like, I think this is going to do well. Like, I think it's going to do really well. But then just because I know, again, the caveats, I understand how the market's a zany thing, how like you can make something that's really good and still only, some people play it. Like, then it becomes this sort of, I feel like I vacillate between being very confident and being like, I feel like I can't have confidence.
Predict. Well, and it's also very easy to obsess about, you'll look at the people who put in like 50, 60 hours or something, right? And you're like, okay, like it's working for them, right?
Yep.
No questions there. Don't need to really dig into that, right? And then you go down to the other end of the chart and you'll see somebody who has like 6 minutes.
Yeah, you're like, what the hell?
Right? And you're like, what is that? Because you could kind of come with a laundry list of things where you're like, maybe it was a device problem. Like maybe they booted up and it just ran like shit, or maybe it crashed. Maybe they just installed it and then realized they didn't have time to play because something happened. Like you can come with a lot of reasons, and none of them are particularly obvious or in your control, maybe necessarily.
They're not in the data. It's usually the problem.
Yeah, they're not in the data. So if you don't know them, like, and that, so this,
you're just guessing.
Yeah, the way that I think about these things is, the first is just a fundamental truth, which is that you can't know until you launch a game how it's going to be received, right? Mm-hmm. But leading up to a launch, what we're trying to do all the time is look for signals that give us confidence in the statistical sense, one way or the other. That like, oh no, something is going awry, or oh, this is looking promising, right? But none of those tell us what's going to happen. They're just sort of signals, right? And so I think I always kind of break things apart into positive versus negative signals. And the question you're always asking is just, is this consistent with some hypothesis, right? So hypothesis being the game's not working and we've got fundamental problems and it just can't possibly work, right? Mm-hmm. We have direct evidence against that. Nobody plays a game for 50 hours that is bad, right? That's just not a thing. And certainly in our case,
having a good time, they just would say that and then they would stop playing.
Even people, and actually maybe even in particular people who were biased towards wanting the game in the first place, which is what our tester pool is, because they loved the original, right? Mm-hmm. So if the sequel was significantly worse than the original, we would...
they'd be pretty pissed off about it.
Right? We would hear about it and we would see it. And that's not happening, right? So that's where there's like, we have a nice, strong signal that like the worst case scenario was definitely not happening.
Definitely, yeah.
We have given the biases of the pool, we have given and so we have the caveat of those biases, which is basically people who like Crashlands 1. Mm-hmm. What our data shows right now is that people who like Crashlands 1 like Crashlands 2 a lot.
Right?
Not all of them, right? Because there's like, there's going to be like the one or two people who were like, nah, I wish it was closer to the original.
Yeah,
right?
But
which we've heard, right?
Yeah, but
statistically,
but the majority, the wide majority of them, right?
Yeah, because again, you can't please everybody. No. A game for everyone is a game for no one, right? So
yeah, and so we know that that's true, and we have basically the bottom sort of 25% of our tester pool kind of hasn't really made any additional testing since they like basically booted up the game once or twice, right? Mm-hmm. But we don't know why, because what we haven't heard is those players coming in and saying, oh, I hated this and here's why, right?
Correct.
That's basically this kind of silent population of people.
And they're just generally disengaged.
Yeah, just disengaged people, right? And so if what we were hearing was people who played the game for a short period of time and then told us and like complained about it loudly, we would know that there are people who hate this game and we would know why, right? The silent version of that has a lot more possible explanations, including people don't like it and aren't communicative, right? But that's going to be a subset of the reasons of people aren't playing it. So what we're left with is like pretty weak negative signals and very strong positive signals. None of these tell us what's going to happen at launch, but all of them are consistent with what we would need to see and what we would see if the game was good for original Crashlands players, and was a good overall experience, right? The part that's really missing fundamentally is how will it be perceived by people who are not Crashlands 1 fans? We just don't have that information in any way, shape, or form. and we can't get it. There's just no way to get it, right? So that's that population of like, well, at launch, we want to recapture Crashlands 1 players, definitely. And there's a lot of them. So all the signals that we're getting are good and leaning towards that being a success. And then we also want to have a much wider market and bring in new people. And that, who the fuck knows, right? Who knows if that can happen?
The test is launched basically for that, right?
Yeah. No, we like to use Valve as an example because remember they released that card game Artifact? Like it's probably like a decade ago by now.
Yeah, is that even still? I don't think Steam pulls down.
I don't know.
So it's probably still going. Right?
Yeah.
But there was a lot of interesting chatter about that because it's like, okay, Valve releases good games, right? Like we're talking Half-Life, we're talking Portal, we're talking Team Fortress, we're talking Left 4 Dead, right? And also they have data about all the games. Yep. They have more data than anybody. And so if you could use data to then sort of reverse engineer like what the market is interested in and what kind of game to make, they would be the ones who have the financial resources. They have everything.
Yep.
Everything, right? And then they released this Artifact game and
kind of a dud.
Nobody gave a shit, right? And so if Valve can't reliably release hits, then nobody can, right? You just don't know what's going to happen.
Well, I think that's the big thing is that leading up to launch, there are negative signals that you can see.
Definitely.
Right.
You could see a lack of press attention. So it's like one of the things we had trouble with Levelhead was just getting people to, either review it or do anything with it.
And then just like how we talk about the nail whiff thing, right? Like that doesn't actually correlate to the quality of the game. Like the game might be doing a really good job at what it set out to do. It's just a question of, do people give a shit?
Yeah. When making games for a living, the goal isn't actually to make a good game. It's to make a game that sells successfully, right?
Yes.
And normally we think of the former being a requirement for the latter, right? So we make a good game so that it will sell well, right? But the ultimate goal is actually selling it successfully.
Yeah. We think of good as a necessary but not sufficient condition for the game to succeed. And in some cases, like I think if you're looking at a game that did super well and you're like, yeah, but it's a terrible game. Again, that's
the word game is doing a lot of lifting is the problem, right? Because it's like, what exactly about it appeals to people? You can have such different. I mean, you look like Stardew Valley versus like Call of Duty. They're both games, but like it's not like a pizza, right? Where it's like,
well, and different people are gonna feel better or worse about each of those games, right? Exactly. Like you could have somebody who's really into Call of Duty and they'd be like, Stardew Valley sucks. I would never play that stupid game, right? And also vice versa, right? Stardew Valley fans would be like, who would play Call of Duty? That game sucks. So what is a terrible game is very subjective, right? Because a lot of times people just use their preferences to determine. When they say a game sucks, what they really mean is I wouldn't like to play that game. Not that the game is inherently bad at what it was doing, right? So there's a lot of
they often do mean that, but it's because they can't tell the difference between
they can't
their
disentangle
opinion and objective reality.
Right. So I guess it's basically. But it's like we're seeing all the signals that we would hope to see, and one of the questions we ask internally, because again we're just looking at this data, but we don't have. It's not like we have this data for every game that's launched on Steam, right? Like, oh, they ran it with 100 people. What did their graphs look like, right? We don't have that, so we're looking at the data in a vacuum. The nice thing is that we have at least Crashlands to compare it to, right? So we can think about the numbers with some context. But so as a result, then we're basically left, as Adam said, with this kind of this question of like, how would this look if it were going better, and how would it look if it were going poorly, right? And then you try to like thread that, and it's one of those things where, at least so far as I can tell, largely for the data we've gotten so far, I can't figure out a realistic way that it would look better, if that makes sense. Like,
well, is it like theoretically, we just don't know what better could look like, because theoretically, it could be the case that a game was so good that even people who didn't have time somehow shut down their whole lives and made time.
That's what it is. It's like, does it mean that like every day has 8 hours of playtime from every single person in your beta group? And it's like, that's
exactly it. It's like, is that the things that look better are, it's impossible to decide like which of those are realistic versus unrealistic and so on.
There's a sliding scale here, right?
Yeah, it's a huge range. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where it becomes tricky, because we're like, it looks good.
Yeah. But we don't know what.
I even think about how like whenever a new WoW season starts, there's this huge distribution in my WoW rating guild of how people approach it. So like there'll be probably like maybe 10% to 15% of the people will literally take a week off of work and just play for 14 hours a day for the whole first week. Other people like myself have no real change in playtime. I still work normal hours. I would play in the evenings, maybe play a little bit more on the weekends than I normally would. And then there's other people who play very casually, where they play maybe like a couple hours a week, right? And for them, they're like, yeah, new season, but like it's fine. I'm just vibing, right? And they still just play a couple hours a week. And all those groups of people are enjoying the game and playing it as much as they can or want to, right? But what you end up with is this huge difference in playtime, right? So kind of what we're seeing but again, like you can't, it doesn't mean that if the playtime goes up or down a little bit in like different parts of the curve, you can't really tell why that's happening or what it means. And so one thing that's kind of interesting about the playtime curve that we're seeing with the beta is that in the first week, it looked like an exponential curve where like the people towards the top end were so much farther ahead than people in the middle. So yeah, it was like kind of like flat at the bottom end, and then it just kind of kept going up faster and faster. Yep. Yeah. And so we were looking at that and we're like, what that probably means is, again, just like the WoW people, right? Like the people who took a week off and just played for 12 hours a day, in that first week, they got like 70 hours in, right? And then like the people playing casually had like 2. Yep. But then the people who took a week off, they're burned out now. They got to sleep. Like they're just so fucking tired, right? And then after that kind of initial rush, their playtime falls off a cliff. It drops by more than half, right?
Which is, I guess, there's another, which is expected for the genre, right? It's not like the hope is that someone plays through the whole 40, 60 hour experience, but it's not like a repeat game that you're going to play, that you're just going to play for like 6 hours a day every day. You know what I mean? Like it's not. Yeah, we know that. So.
It's not a hobby game. Yeah. And so what you're kind of seeing is like the people who really like blaze through and put an insane amount of time in the first week, got to the end of the game or whatever, or they're like, okay, I've done enough because it's beta and now I want to like wait until launch to go like do more things, and so the people who really went all in, their playtime kind of is slowly trickling down. And then other people who are playing more consistently, they're like slowly catching up. So then the graph is kind of changing from like an exponential, like a hockey stick, to being more of like a flat line.
Just like a Y equals X kind of thing.
Yeah. Because like the people in the middle are just like, they're all playing the same amount every day. And they're just, So again, like it's all good signals, meaning like, yeah, people are just playing the game how they want to play it. If they're really into it, they can just go nuts and just kind of no life it for a while. Other people are playing it more casually and they can kind of spend an hour or 2 a day and have a great time. And they just keep coming back. And so again, all good signals, all strong signals. Does it mean anything for launch? We'll find out. So otherwise, we are starting to prepare for marketing because I think, what is it? 6 weeks, 5 weeks, something like that.
It's coming in
April 10th
away.
So it's coming.
April 10th. So there's a lot of stuff that needs to happen.
Yeah, the game has to be done enough, basically when this podcast episode goes live, that we can start handing out keys to press. Because the other thing about like we talk a lot about the order of ops and how you get to launch day, but so much stuff just has to be done well in advance of your release day, because like we were talking about, localization is always lagging behind, so you need to have time to make sure that gets finished up. But that's not just so that it's ready for launch, but also so it's ready for press and streamers to have earlier access with the completely translated game, right? And so it has to be enough done that even if you give them the caveat of like, by the way, some of it won't be translated until we get to launch, but certainly enough of it is that you can have the full intended experience and not get, have a bad and confusing experience. So like, to deal with that, we have to get stuff to press early enough that, since we're not a AAA title, right, that they can fit us in between when they're doing all the other stuff.
If you want to get into the larger publications, that again, we always got to think about what's their incentive, what's their interest. right? And a lot of them, because they love, like the people who work there love games, and because indie games frequently, basically monthly, break out and become things that people talk about a lot. They basically are rolling the dice when they're covering a smaller game, like an indie title, right? They're going to always be covering every large AAA game.
The game won't bring attention to their article. It's going the other way, you know?
Right. To start with, right? And so, but they're basically gambling on that, because it's like, okay, if the game does hit big, then now they got, they already have stuff in, it's already cooking about that. So what you need to do then is basically you're getting the press keys out to those, like the big ones, in with enough time that they can like essentially figure out how to like slot you in amongst all of the giants, right?
In their playtime, right? Because they're playtesting all these things to have their, because there's a sequence of things where it's like, we have an embargo date for preview stuff from press and streamers and stuff, right? Which is basically like, we put some limits on, like, please don't go beyond this many hours of gameplay because we don't want to spoil the whole game, Don't actually put any review scores in yet because we don't really care about that exactly, but press outlets do, because they want to make sure that their scores go up before, or at least at the same time as everybody else's. So there's like stuff like that where we're trying to like thread all these needles of the timeline, but all of it requires that these people that are involved with that have enough time to play the game enough that they can form opinions, put scores together, and they're trying to do that with what is a 50-hour game, right? Yeah. In our case, threading that in between all the other games are also trying to do this with, which include the ones they have to cover, which are all the big AAA things.
So you run into this thing then where it's like, okay, you want to give keys to people. I mean, you want to give them to them, basically weeks in advance. But of course, the reality is like every week that the game isn't launched is also a cost, like for us, right? And so you gotta find that line of being like, okay, where can we really call this thing quits at the highest quality that we can, really manage before it goes to that first, like before basically we're sending out what you consider like the gold CD, like the gold edition of the thing, right? Where it's like, this is the launch version, or close enough to it that we don't mind. And we can easily be like, don't worry about X, Y, Z. So we're essentially going to be doing that next week and next week, which is crazy.
And then otherwise we have this kind of funny thing that, this always happens at this stage of development, which is you have to change your mindset toward the game, not in thinking about like, oh, it would be cool if we did this. It would be nice if we had this. Instead, it's like, what has to happen?
Yes.
And only do those things. Because if you keep cramming more stuff in the game, now that's becoming more and more of a risk. Mm-hmm. Because as you approach the launch date, changes become more risky.
Because you might change necessarily less tested, right?
Yeah, you don't have as much time to test them and find any issues. And so, because of with all the beta feedback, we ended up having, I think I personally had 120 something items in my task list of like things to do and to change in the game. And as we're coming up to this timeline of saying, okay, we need to start getting keys out to press and stuff like that, we had to just sit down and take a day and just go, okay, let's look through this list and sort it by urgent, like stuff that needs to happen so it can be localized or whatever. That definitely needs to be in there. Then there's must-haves, which is things that still need to be in there, but they can happen after the urgent things. Mm-hmm. And then every other thing, no matter how much we would like to do it,
post-launch
is dead. It's dead in the water. It's going into the post-launch pile. We'll revisit it after the launch. Because really the ideal case for us is basically the couple weeks leading up to the launch day. We're just playing Crashlands 2. And making tiny little adjustments,
surgical bug fixes, basically.
Little optimizations, little bug fixes, little tweaks to the game economy, like this recipe here or whatever, but nothing major.
Especially for a game like Crashlands 2, because there's so many ways that things can go wrong. Is like ideally just the whole team everyone's job is the same, which is just keep playtesting the game as we make these surgical fixes to try to get sufficient coverage leading up to the launch.
So it's all about the triage. I had a pretty funny realization yesterday, which was about this mechanic in the game where we had this thing where like you can hit enemies with this weapon and it spawns a fire patch under their feet. Okay. And it's a really strong weapon for the reason that if a fire patch is like an area, right? So you hit an enemy, and if the fire patch appears, then all the surrounding enemies will also get burned. Okay, so just
it's useful for like dealing with a large horde of things, you know. All
Yeah.
at once.
So if you think about like, let's say your alternative is like you have like a dagger that when you stab somebody, it makes them bleed for 100 damage, right? But if you have this fire thingy and a fire patch appears and the fire does 100 damage, but there's a group of enemies, the fire might actually do 500 damage, right? So it scales up with number of targets. And so this is just one of those surgical balance things where I've been playing with this burning tool, this burning weapon for this past week. And I'm like, why is this so much better? Like, I know that on paper, it's like, yeah, the fire patch will do damage to surrounding enemies, but like this thing is just absolutely obliterating groups of enemies. So I'm like looking really closely and I'm like, the fire patch is actually spawning under every enemy. So when the dice roll happens, if you happen to catch, 5 enemies in your swing,
Then you get
all five of them.
patches.
Yeah, all 5 of them make a fire patch.
Independently rolled per enemy, right?
And then all 5 fire patches burn all 5 enemies. So suddenly you're doing like 25 times the amount of damage, and it exponentially goes up. So, you hit 10 enemies, you're doing a fucking 100 times more damage because it's like a squaring, basically, of the number of enemies. And so there's these things like that where literally to change this because of the game changer, I just like checked a checkbox.
Right.
And then that changed how the fire patches spawn and everything is okay now. But there are these little things like that where I was kind of like having a less good time playing the game, but I couldn't put my finger on it because it was just feeling way too easy, and I was playing on the hardest mode. And I'm just mowing enemies down, and then like I would try switching to other play styles, and just none of them were even coming close to how fast I was killing stuff. And I was like, okay, something's weird here, right? And so those are the kinds of things where you can theory craft stuff on paper and you can like implement it, but unless you're playing the game and feeling it out, you just can't find some of those things.
Yeah.
And so that's where our time needs to shift into, sort of like in this last month, but especially the last couple of weeks leading up to the launch. It's like finding all those little fiddly things.
Well, a big part of it too is also even less on the one big thing we know from the beta also is basically the game is working, right? So there's really only like 1 or 2 of these spots where we want to massage some of the like progression flow, like how the player actually moves through the content. But we actually largely want to not touch almost any of it, right? Because we know that it works. So
works well enough.
Yeah, it works well enough. And so there's also I think more of a focus sort of like in the next coming after like next week or so on just technical improvements, like straight up very very nerd level optimizations, right? And so that's been doing a lot of that
optimizations.
Yeah, trying to just make it so that the game's overall footprint on devices just gets lower and lower and lower. And the big benefit of that is that it actually comes in a variety of forms. One is that you have these like tipping point things with all sorts of stuff, whether it's like a device that has just enough RAM to run the game until
20
happens.
minutes, and then it crashes.
Basically, it's a sort of way of like putting up some time in, not just for the game to like run smoother, because it already runs well on a good device, but also just to make it so that post-launch we don't have as much stuff to deal with, right? So there's kind of this like banking of time and this investment in just these tons of these optimizations, which will be kind of what's on Cessplate coming up here.
Yeah, and I gotta say, I love optimizations. If my whole job was just optimizing, I'd be so fucking pumped. It's like
very satisfying.
It's
well,
like
that it works, man. I don't know. There's nothing, it's like,
but it's also that like with this fire patch thing, like I fixed it and I went and tested it and I was like, this feels better for me, and the change I made is working the way that I'm intending it to work. Right? Is it good though?
Yep.
And I feel like it is, but I don't know if everybody's going to agree, because like some people just like to be an orbital nuke and one shot everything and have no challenge.
Design is based on feelings. So
design is based on feelings, and so you can never have something that everybody's going to like, right? And so,
but everybody likes higher percentage optimization stuff. You know what I mean?
If I optimize some shit, because like this week, actually, it was last weekend. I found some stuff for the mobile version. I was able to boost FPS by 40%. On mobile.
Yeah, it's just a huge amount.
It's a huge amount, right? And it's fun to like find those bottlenecks and find something where you're like, I wonder like if I could change the order operations of this, or like store this data differently so it can be retrieved differently. And then you can measure it. And you can be like, and nobody's upset that they got more FPS.
Yep.
Nobody. Everybody likes that. Yep. And so
there was
actually an unambiguous win.
Yeah, but speaking of mobile too, it's one of the things I was curious about. and hoping to see in the beta. So the beta tester pool is biased towards people who could play on Steam and mobile, right? So it's high representation of mobile platforms. So basically like 60% of all testers have at least an Android or iDevice, right? And then like 80% of testers have a Steam, like PC device. And then a huge fraction have both, right? So the reason we did that was because we wanted to make sure we could test cross-platform stuff, have a lot of device representation for a smaller number of users, because that was just, better information density, basically. But also what we wanted to know was if people do have access to multiple platforms, what do they preferentially play on? Because the assumption has always been like the PC experience is just better. Your screen's bigger at minimum. That's just a better experience, right? And that people would be like really biased towards that. And that is true that most of our playtime is coming from Steam, but it's not as biased towards that as I would have expected.
Not from a form factor standpoint, right? Because you got Steam Decks in there too. So you end up with
that's true, yeah. But I mean just Steam PC, like it's biased towards that, definitely.
Yep.
But again, so is the tester population in the first place. But I'm not really seeing like suppressed playtime on mobile that I would have expected to see. And in fact,
right now we are at a quarter iOS, 16% Android, 50% desktop, and then 7% Steam Deck. I rounded those numbers, so they're not going to exactly add up to 100, but of playtime people have put in.
Yeah, which basically matches the proportions of the devices that people have, right? So I would have expected that to be biased towards, because 80% of people have a Windows PC, right, in our test pool. So I would have expected that to bias towards like 80% of playtime. Basically, like if people had Steam on a PC, that's what they'd be playing on. And that just really isn't what we see. And so that has been a very pleasant surprise to me. That also means meaning basically that people are just having a really good time on the mobile version, and a good enough time that they're not like, oh, I'll just wait until I get to my desktop, right? And so these mobile optimizations that it's figured out how to do have dramatically improved that experience. But it's also given this nice positive signal of like, okay, this actually could be really successful on mobile. And the whole crossplay thing is like, within this test pool, bias towards that, like, is working really successfully, right? Which, again, these strong positive signals, but who knows?
Yeah, we had a lot of people in the beta who have messaged us surprised that their saves they didn't have to do anything, but they just like signed in on both devices. They played on Steam for a while, and then they just picked up their phone and hit play, and they're just playing the save still right where they left it. They're just like, I don't get it. How does this happen? It's, did a lot of work behind the scenes to make it good, so that you don't have to think about it. But yeah, I mean, it's all working. So pretty excited and kind of tired, honestly.
I'm hoping that we get at least on my side, since I've a lot of technical stuff to do, that I could take a bit of a nap after we get this thing kicked out to press. And just be like, okay, take a fucking minute.
Yeah, I mean, it would be best if everybody involved in content just took a nap, so that
it also would make us stop touching the game, which is also
exactly that's okay. Because every time we touch the game, it's like, okay, there's more QA that has to happen, a lot more to make sure it's fine. So if we could,
although our QA aren't complaining about it, they're like, thanks, please give us more stuff to do.
I'm not worried so much about the time going into it as in things falling through the cracks, because
Yeah. All right, let's see. Well, I think we have time. Let's get to a question.
Let's do it.
We'll see if we can do it. This question comes from Giantmuskrat, who says, look out, this could require some pre-work. Would you replay your older titles on bscotch.itch.io and give them a score on the nailed it or whiffed it scale?
So we would have had to have done that, which we did not do.
So we looked back a couple weeks ago, because we haven't taken questions in a while, because shorter episodes and beta. A couple of weeks ago we saw this question, so we looked back at our itch page at some of our games. We thought, well, we don't need to play them because we made them, and we did play them quite a bit. But there's some pretty goofy ones in here. So we'll talk about a couple of them on the nail whiff scale.
Yeah.
And I think people can find these. What is it, like bscotch.itch.io or something? Probably.
Yeah. So these are basically our jam games, and then we also have a comic up there, Crashlands Origins, if people want to check that out. So I want to talk about Torso Demon Saga.
Ooh, okay.
So this is an older one. So this was as a 2-player isometric platformer, I guess.
Yeah, or top down, but yeah.
So it's basically a game where you kind of like simply navigate through these levels. I can't remember if it was randomly generated or not.
I think it's
probably
procedural. Yeah.
And the goal is to basically find the exit of these levels. And there's like a lot of darkness that surrounds you. And there's this like mouth. I think we just called it the raging mouth beast or something. It's just this like shadow made of particles that has like a mouth that will come out of the darkness and try to get you. And then it like veers away when it gets into light. So the gimmick of the game is that it's 2-player game and you're tethered together with basically a stretchy bungee cord. Neither of you has arms and legs for some reason. I think that's why they're called torso demons.
Yep.
But you do have butts.
The reason being, who has time to animate that?
Who has time to animate that?
So,
It's a jam game. We can draw butts, though. So they have butts. Much like many of our earlier characters, like Tack from Quadrupus Rampage. You got to have at least butts. So you can't jump in this game, but you can pull the rope.
You can yank.
Which flings your partner basically equidistant. To the other direction. So if your partner, let's say your partner is like 200 pixels south of you and you yank the rope, it'll fling them so that they end up 200 pixels north of you. As you're
describing this, it's basically that chained game that went viral a little while ago where it's co-op. I think it's a big thing on Twitch too. You play as like people trying to escape hail or something, but you're chained together with a big chain. Together. Yeah, and you got to go do basically do like hazards, together. Yeah. So there were some kind of goofy things you could do. Like if you both pulled the rope at the same time, roughly, you would swap places. And also like, since you can't jump, you would need to basically, if you wanted to cross a gap as a team, then like one of you needs to approach the gap. The other one needs to get away from the gap. Then the closed person pulls you, flings you across, and then you pull the rope to pull them over. While you're being chased by the raging mouth beast. So it ends up being kind of like...
And you also got to not fling too far, because then you could fling...
There might be
because you could fling them go too far, and then they land in a different hole. Or into the raging mouth beast. Yeah. So this is, for me, one of my favorite concepts of a game that we did. I feel like it nails it just in terms of like... it's simple, and it was pretty fucking fun to play. There's not much to it because it's a jam game.
Yeah.
But that mechanic on its own was fun enough that you just didn't really have to have much going on in the game to have it be kind of a riot.
I think a lot of the kind of couch co-op games are just really fun they're just fun to make during jams. Because like we had Bread Brothers, which I think was the one we did for...
We made that one
ages ago.
Back while we were in Simulatronics.
Yeah, they're basically your peanut butter jelly sandwich is split in half, and you have 2 different kinds of guns for some reason. It's insane. But you could... The important thing was that you could like... If you get close to each
slap
other,
your slices together.
Yeah, you get close to each other and you slap your slices together and you like Megazord into the sandwich.
Into a peanut butter jelly sandwich.
One of you controls the legs, the other one's now the gun. It's fucking weird, but it's the sort of thing where it's, again, for something you build in a weekend, it's just a really fun. A lot of those couch co-op games, they're actually just fun because you play them with another person, so they're inherently
the bummer about those games is that they just like can't be like, these are jam.
They can't go anywhere.
They weren't meant to go anywhere, right? But those like designs though are exactly the kinds of things that if it had actual online multiplayer, right, is like that's like a requirement for a game like that to actually have any kind of success.
Yeah,
because 82 people who want to play it are almost guaranteed to not be in the same physical space.
Yes,
and even if they are, it's more likely that they each have a phone than that there's like a console with 2 controllers that they can use, right? So I think it's like the curse of that game style, like the multiplayer stuff.
Any co-op stuff,
Yeah, is like there's so many cool, weird ideas, but for any of them to be successful, it's like, well, gotta fucking figure out online multiplayer.
Yep.
It's just the only way.
Well, and then if it's online multiplayer, then it needs enough like loops and engagement, long-term engagement things, like keep the player base going. It's like. I think back to the days of like Unreal Tournament where games hadn't evolved to the point of having battle passes and, player bases of 2 million or whatever. And so like, you would like play Unreal Tournament and then nobody gave it like the company, like Epic who made it, they didn't give a shit whether there was 10 million people playing it or 10 people playing it.
They weren't even running servers. You were just
They didn't even run
select a
servers.
server from a list. You'd be like, there's like 14 people in there, so that looks like a good match. That's how you thought
Yeah,
about it.
and then the game didn't have it didn't have in-app purchases, didn't have battle passes, didn't have unlock. Like literally, just you'd boot up the game, and it's like, here's your gun, get out there, right? And that was it. And
it only works in a multiplayer context, you know.
Yeah, like at that time, it worked amazing, but nowadays, because you're competing with these AAA studios who have juiced the engagement mechanics of the game, then like those games just suck all the oxygen out of the room, and like nobody plays Unreal Tournament.
Nope.
That's not. I mean, that's not true. You can actually still play Unreal Tournament, and there's still a few people playing it, right? But nobody's talking about it. It's not a Fortnite. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, the people who are playing it at this point, you know, like I wouldn't want to go play against them, you know, because
oh yeah, well, there's rampant cheating. Just
yeah,
because there's no anti-cheat, because these games are from a day like back in the day when LAN parties were how you played them, because like internet was slow enough that it was not that good of an experience to play online, and so you would like get together with some friends and
lug your giant machines.
You would
over
lug
to a house.
your machine over there. What we used to do is we went over to Grinnell College's computer lab after hours, and
one of my friends' dad was a professor over there, and he would just let us in and then take off, and then we would just like and it would be like, just don't go anywhere except this room until you're gonna leave, so that he doesn't get in trouble for like letting all these kids in, you know. Then we of course we all burned a copy of the game.
So you just install fucking Unreal on just college computers and start blasting each other.
We just have a LAN party like all day,
because we're like 14 and we don't have money. We don't, you know. It's like we did some crimes, you know. But
we downloaded some cars. Yeah,
but that's how it was back then, you know.
And we all make up for all of the piracy in our youth when we can't afford anything by buy a fuckload of things.
I actually did buy all those games on. Because like they got like Unreal Tournament and stuff, they all got remastered and re-released on Steam.
Yeah, sure. I also bought them all. Yep.
So I paid.
Which for anybody listening to the podcast who has pirated our games, as long as you buy them someday, you know. So I don't give a shit.
Put a pin in it.
Yeah,
whatever.
It's fine. It's fine.
I get it.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
All right. There's one more game that I want to talk about, which is the game I Can't See Shit.
Oh yeah,
that was a good one.
So this game, the idea was
you're a blind creature, but you have to use echolocation to do platforming. It's a platformer.
You kind of like throw something that makes noise. Right?
You basically bark, and it's like it comes out as a projectile, and then that hits stuff. And when it hits something, you could see that it's sort of like a like a sound vibration echoes through the platforms that it hits. So you're kind of like spitting out these barks, and I think they ricochet or something. So you can kind of like
it's kind of like you'd spit out this thing that looked like a little white circle kind of thing, and when it would hit a surface, then a bunch of smaller of those orbs would refract off of it and then splash onto other things. So basically, the bigger the sound, the more it would kind of like ripple out through the stuff you hit, so you could see it. Mm-hmm. So with this, we used a system from Game Maker called Surfaces, where you can sort of like temporarily render things onto an image, and then you can kind of like occlude parts of it or whatever. So what this meant was basically there's an entire like platformer level, and then we obscure it by putting a surface in front of it. Mm-hmm. So that surface has just like fog or clouds or some shit on it. And when you would spit out these things, then they would basically temporarily like punch a hole in that surface, so you could kind of see the world behind the veil, and then it would quickly fade back away. So you could only quote see things temporarily by making these little chirps that would kind of like reveal little pieces of the level. And if you were jumping to a place I think you could only spit your projectiles like left and right. Yeah, I think. And so if you were jumping to a place, like maybe like you're standing on a ledge, you can't see the ledge because you saw it at one point, but now you can't because it's below you. All right. I think if you're standing on something, you can see it. If you're touching something, you can see it. So you'd see this little ledge, but then you think you're standing at the edge of a cliff. You're pretty sure because you saw it at one point with one of your echoes. And then you would have to like try to like chirp out your little sounds to try to reveal if there's some place you can jump to. And then once you jump, like mid-jump, the thing is fading away from view. So you have to kind of remember where it was and try to land on it.
I think as far as like being an echolocation simulator, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good time.
Yeah. And I think we made that one as part of we did like a 1 week game jam where we just made a game every day. And I think that was one of them.
That was one. The shucks, I crashed my ship and now I have to explode heads until I find all my ship parts and repair my ship to get off this planet. That's the title.
Yeah, that one's also on our
that
page.
Them. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. I think my favorite, or one of my favorites, is just I mentioned Do You Even Lift before, but it's the elevator simulator. Again, when I think about
you just control an elevator. That's all you do.
Yeah, I think what's so fun about jam games is it's just that you can explore concepts that like I could not necessarily, I guess I could not conscientiously suggest that the
in
team
the studio
invests in this idea, right? But it's very fun to build like a blind platformer, basically dumb ideas, right? Blind platformer, elevator simulator, where your whole job is be an elevator and like move people up and down a building while there's aliens also in the corridors that you got to like manage, close doors on them and stuff like that.
I mean, it's basically the commercial versus non-commercial making of games, right? It's like having an idea and being like, it would just be fun if we got to make this and if it existed in the world. And that's ideally people would also then buy it so we could keep on making more things like that, right? But
there's a lot more things in that camp, actually.
Infinitely more things.
Infinitely more. Yeah, because it's all these little ideas where like whether it's Bread Brothers, I Can't See Shit, whatever else. It's like the idea of how you would spin that out into like a marketable thing that anybody beyond the fact that it was fun to build, wouldn't it? Or like play for 10 minutes would be interested in.
I think this kind of comes down to games versus mini games.
Yes.
So I think about how like the fishing game in Crashlands 2 is partly inspired by is partly inspired by a game we made where you had to like catch birds out of the sky, right, in a jam, and also partly inspired by the fishing mini game in original Crashlands. And neither of those mini games we would probably ever think about like making into a game in and of themselves, but they're fun. They're fun little things to interact with. And so we just roll them in as part of a larger game.
Yeah, I heard there's some distinction there. I think someone, I remember who was talking about it. It's like a distinction between toys and games, right? Which like a toy is just like it's an interesting fun
concept,
like
it's an exploration of a tightly scoped concept.
Yeah. But a game then is where the loops come in. And I think that's always the tricky one.
A game is an integration problem. It's like merging all these toys and ideas into one.
But you can also take the approach of like the UFO 50, where you just make 50 toys and then say, this is a game, right?
Yeah, that's usually a toy chest,
Yeah, I actually never played any of them because it's like none of it looks like stuff that I'm into. But that was very successful as a project.
But in a way that, if we think about like in Crashlands 2, we've got stuff like the combat is a completely different thing from the base building.
Yeah.
And which is a completely different thing from gardening, which is completely different from fishing, which is completely different from the quests and story,
Yeah, I mean, most games are actually a collection of toys that
it's just a toy box that works really well together, A bunch of fun things to play with that all talk to each other.
It's like having it's like lots of Legos that you then can like, mix and match. Speaking of Legos, this is definitely a non sequitur.
Go for it.
But I just saw yesterday that Lego released a new kit for like a T-Rex skeleton. It's like part of their Jurassic Park set or whatever. But it's one of their like realistic-y kind of models, and it's like 3 feet long. It's just this huge, delightful, like 3,000 piece T-Rex skeleton.
Cool.
And I was like, it goes live in March. No doubt it'll be sold out instantly. I won't be able to get it, but that's one of those few things.
How much is it?
It's like $250 because Legos.
That's it.
I mean,
yeah, exactly. That was my thought too. I was like,
for Legos, I figured that would be 10 times that much.
I know, but yeah. So just so people know that is a thing that's going to exist soon.
Speaking of good toys, Yep.
Now, isn't it true that Lego is the largest producer of tires in the world?
You mean like those little tiny tires?
They produce the most tires out of any
I think I might be stretching the definition of tire somewhat, but
I mean, they're rubber, they're tires.
Tiny.
But kind of like the more I learned about Lego and kind of like what they've had to do, because they were a case study in lots of business school things because they make these tiny little fucking plastic bricks and they make billions and trillions of them. And those little bricks need to perfectly fit together.
Yeah, the precision is so high.
Even when you've had them for 30 years. Like you can take a Lego brick from your own childhood and stick it onto a Lego brick that you bought today, and they will fit perfectly together, right? Which is honestly, it's like compared to, like a cyber truck whose wheel just falls off because you drove it. Like
it's a different kind of engineering. You know what I mean?
The amount of engineering they put into something that's arguably it's just a toy. So like, who cares, right? But they really give a shit about the engineering of their stuff. If you're ever interested in learning some just cool stuff about like people solving interesting problems, look into Lego because those people are nuts.
Whenever people are like extremely serious about what are at the end of the day, like essentially whimsical things. So whether it's making video games.
Yeah, like it's what we try to do, right? We try to apply the same degree of rigor to the technological product of games that we make, right?
Yeah, I love it. I think it's always so fun seeing that contrast where it's like you make something that's silly, but it's like, it's very intense putting it together. It
is funny because like it's something that we I don't know, it's come up in a while on the podcast, but like in the earlier days of us doing this, so much of what we heard from other people was just like kind of disbelief that we were following this path because it's just games. Who cares? Couldn't we all be doing something more worthwhile, And meanwhile, those people are like selling insurance or they're like working in banks, stealing people's money, like the seriousness aspect of it is like most things that people actually do for a living aren't actually, they have the veneer of seriousness, but they don't need to be happening. Really,
they're absurd.
Yeah, it's actually absurd.
It's just absurd.
Yeah, it's just what we're used to, and we're used to like, we're used to applying this like, oh yeah, well this is important because it has a place in society that mediates some kind of a thing, without asking like, but what if the thing wasn't even happening? Would that be?
I will say what's been funny. I don't know if you guys felt this, but like as we transitioned out of our 20s into our 30s, is that it has felt like the tenor of that like general commentary we got from people has shifted, where it went from before we had in some ways before we had much success at all, which people are always kind of shitting on you when you're trying to do something new. So in that one case, but also just kind of even after the original game came out and stuff, that like shouldn't you be using your talents for something more? Largely, I've gotten in the last couple of years as people just being like, man, I wish I was doing something.
Yep.
Enjoyable that other people enjoyed, and I don't know if it's just an age thing because it's like most people are talking to at that point were in their 20s or whatever else.
I think once you're talking to people who are now like in the middle of the grind, then people, because everybody eventually realizes like actually why like why and
but also if everybody who made creative products, film, books, music, games, TV shows, whatever. If all those people were like, you know what, actually, we're going to take our talents and put it into something useful. What kind of fucking world would that be? Where, hey,
humorless hellscape? I don't know.
Yeah, there's no more football on TV. There's no more concerts to go to. There's no, there's nothing. We all just go work at insurance companies. It's like we need a diversity of things happening because it keeps everything interesting.
Here's the thing: and we were as a species playing long before we were working. So I'm going to go with the most primal aspect here. Well,
we were always working, but long before we had jobs.
That's what I mean.
That's for sure. That's a relatively new concept. So. Yeah, I think it's probably a good place to hang our hat for this episode.
Yeah, I think it's basically make a serious effort to make fun things. That's serious fun.
Be serious about your fun.
Yeah.
We'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sam Acosta for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wishlist. Get over to the App Store and pre-order, and get over to Google Play and pre-register. And all those things will help boost the game on launch and help us have a successful release. We'd appreciate it. So thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week.
Bye.